For now, Edward Stetton presents Sunday.
A Ukrainian hymn sung in Trafalgar Square at a rally organised by the Catholic Church in London this weekend. Welcome to Sunday, which we are once again devoting mainly to the war in Ukraine. We'll hear from religious leaders and faith workers in the front line of the humanitarian struggle, including the charities meeting the needs of the hundreds of thousands of refugees who are fleeing the fighting.
There's huge amounts of volunteers that are rallying around our organization. It's really very inspiring. All of civil society has been mobilized. Everybody's trying to help somebody.
And Russian Orthodox priests speak out against the invasion of Ukraine.
I'm deeply ashamed, really. I'm deeply ashamed of the behaviour of Kirill. This is a disgusting Game of Thrones, as it were, in which lots of people are suffering.
Plus, away from the war, a happy ending for the Yorkshire curate who arrived for a service to find that no one at all had shown up. Since we broadcast his story, his parishioners have piled in to give new life to his church.
The door kept on opening and people kept coming in, and we were absolutely delighted to have a lively and engaged congregation.
The latest UN estimate of the scale of the refugee crisis created by the war in Ukraine is sobering indeed. They say 1.5 million people may have fled by the end of today. Our correspondent James Wardhouse is in Kiev. James, before we talk about the refugees, tell us what's been happening in the capital and around the capital overnight.
In the centre of Kiev, it has been quiet. To be honest with you, it's been the third night that's been relatively quiet in this way, but last night especially so, completely at odds really with what's happening in some outskirts of the city as well as the wider part of Ukraine. So I'm talking to you now from the bomb shelter in which we and thousands of others habitually travel up and down from. But in the northwest of the city, there's been more fighting overnight in the districts there, as well as around this airfield, Hostomel airfield, strategically significant. And the Russians are thought to be mounting a fight back to try and regain control of that airfield. Paratroopers did try and attack it earlier in the week. The Ukrainians mounted a counter-artillery strike, but there's been especially heavy fighting there. We did a drive around yesterday to see the city's defences, and as you leave the peaceful centre of Kiev, you start to see more military hardware, more blockades in the road, heavy trucks blocking the way, anti-tank defenders, concrete breeze blocks, and the further out you go, the more soldiers you see, the more of these armed volunteers you see. And those defences have been gradually building as the days go on.
Turning to the refugees then, there was this attempt to create humanitarian corridors to allow people in the south particularly to escape some of the areas under most intense bombardment, but that whole thing collapsed rather dramatically, didn't it?
It did. It lasted for half an hour. After 10 days of fighting, there was meant to be the first pause in hostilities yesterday, agreed in peace talks between negotiators from Ukraine and Russia, so-called humanitarian corridors to let thousands of people, they were hoping to get 200,000 people out of Mariupol specifically. People there have had days without running water, electricity, heating in the midwinter. Temperatures are often below zero. Things are so bad at the moment, people are tapping into their heating systems to get access to water. So the government, as far as the government's concerned, it is a humanitarian crisis waiting to happen. These humanitarian corridors were created to get people out northwest to the Zaporizhia region, where some places were preparing to take people in. The state circus, for example, had their large tent filled full of roll mats and sleeping bags in expectation. But as people packed up and left, either on buses or on their own vehicles, the authorities there say shells started falling on Mariupol again, and there was fighting breaking out along that route. So we're told there'll be another attempt today, but we've very much seen thousands of people trapped in the fire.
Well, James, thank you very much indeed for that. And the greatest humanitarian need is indeed in the south and east of the country, which has seen some of the most intense fighting. Father Vasily Novak is a Catholic priest and chair of the charity Ukraine. This weekend, he is himself driving a truck of supplies from the west of the country to where it's needed.
The situation now in most of the east cities, they already big humanitarian crisis, and people are just without food, without medical care and support. They need emergency response of food, of medicine, drugs, and clothes. Many people are running just away from, if it's possible, not for everybody is possible. They are blocked in the cities, around cities, Russian army and shooting on the cities from everywhere. Many people are responding to our appeal of the Pole International. We are organizing humanitarian aid, and I am just arrived to the west of Ukraine, where I am packing from the one lorry just arrived and crossed the borders. I am taking this stuff, and tomorrow I'm traveling to bring as soon as possible this help, a lot of medical equipment, a lot of food. As well, we are working to find and make a contract with truck company, lorries who can bring and organize this regular bringing humanitarian aid from the west borders to the cities where are the biggest need of humanitarian aid.
That was Father Novak. The Catholic charity Caritas has moved its operation in Ukraine from Kiev to Lviv in the west of the country. Titania Slavnici is its president, and I asked her if she felt safe there.
Nowhere in Ukraine feels very safe. Of course, it's a little bit different here, although I have to say there's a high level of tension in society. There's regularly air raid sirens going off at least 2 or 3 times a day. There's a huge movement of people. Yeah, there's just an upheaval.
Well, let's talk a bit about that movement of people, if we could, because we hear these extraordinary numbers fleeing the country altogether. Mm-hmm. What about the picture internally? What are the numbers in terms of people who are leaving their homes, particularly in the east, but are trying to remain within Ukraine?
We're just starting to register those numbers. I'm sure that they're in the tens of thousands, if not the hundreds of thousands. Caritas as an organization, when we were doing our contingency planning, this is what we had foreseen. That could be a scenario to help people who are in transit. That includes providing hot meals, something warm to drink, a place to rest for a while, maybe a place to sleep. We've also started working on those people who aren't moving towards the border, but are just resettling either the central or western part of the country to be in a more safe place where there isn't such active fighting.
So really emergency aid at this stage, really basic stuff.
Yeah, so right now we're doing initial response is how we call it. And then as the time progresses, the aid is going to go deeper. So for example, now we have some small examples of psychosocial support. We're trying to provide things for children. That kind of service is going to grow deeper as we move forward.
And have you got enough? Have you got what you need at the moment?
We had some issues initially with procurement, but that's been solved for the most part. And then there's also a lot of supplies coming in from abroad, for which I think everybody is very, very, very grateful. So there's a second wave of assistance coming in-kind donations.
What are people saying to you about their plans? Because it must be incredibly difficult for them to know where to go.
That's one of the areas that we're going to be working with the local city governments to set up resettling plans. It's something that we worked on in the eastern part of Ukraine in 2014, 15, and 16. So we've worked on those issues before. Now we're going to transfer those skills and that know-how to Western Ukraine to continue the work here.
And you're a Catholic organization, aren't you? How does that affect the way you work?
Well, it's core to how we work, yeah, because we're called to encounter, we're called to serve others, we're called to be a gift to others. Yeah, so it's a part and parcel of who we are. Not only inside of our organization is there this generosity, but there's huge amounts of volunteers that are rallying around our organization. It's really very inspiring.
Can we just briefly touch on your own background? Because I think I'm right in saying that although you grew up in the United States, your parents fled Ukraine after the Second World War. Is that right?
Yeah, they were fleeing as the front was coming upon them. Yeah, so both my parents at the last minute were able to flee. Their families were involved in civil society, so they were in danger to stay.
And looking at what's happening at the moment, do you have a sort of dreadful sense of history repeating itself?
No, because history doesn't repeat itself. I have a feeling of a like a presence of my family history with me. And it's something that gives me strength, how people, live their lives with integrity despite difficult times. And that's the thing that inspires me.
But to see Ukraine going through this all over again.
I have to say that it's heart-wrenching. But what we've been focusing on here is to look at what is it that we can do to help one another and to help people. And that's something that really restores a sense of dignity. It restores a sense of balance. It gives you hope, even when there's a lot of darkness. And I think that the mission of Caritas really has something to offer to society right now. And it's not just Caritas, all of civil society has been mobilized. Everybody's trying to help somebody.
And just one final question about the future. You say Lviv is reasonably secure at the moment, but that may change. How long do you think you'll be able to go on operating within the country?
Well, we're going to go on operating as long as we can. We have a mission to help people in need. We're a Ukrainian-based organization, so here we are.
Tatiana Stavnichi. The numbers leaving the country altogether are now so huge, this already looks like the biggest refugee crisis since the Second World War. Most, some 650,000 and still counting, are going to Poland. These women and their families have been looked after by the Jesuit Refugee Service and a Christian charity called Operation Mobilization.
My name is Salomia Odemchuk. I'm 22 years old. I came to Kutna from small town Rivne. It took us 50 hours to travel from my city to Kutna. I'm here with my family, my sister, my mom, and my brother. I'm staying in the accommodation organized by the local church and provided by some lovely Polish people. I've started blaming myself. I couldn't understand why I'm here in total safe, and my brothers and my sisters back home, they need to fight. However, under such terrible events, my faith became stronger. I were driven under the rockets, which could hit me at any second, but I was praying. And thanks God, He protected me and my family. And now we're here all together. So praise the Lord.
Hello, my name is Natalia. I came from Vinnytsia on the 1st of March. I am with my child Victoria. I am staying in Warsaw. I have left my husband, my parents, and brother in Ukraine. My husband is in the territorial defense of the city. My mother and my mother-in-law are volunteers, and my brother serves in the Ukrainian army. The Polish people are very kind to us. My faith means to me that there are good people in the world. Since the war, I am feeling depressed, upset, helpless, in danger, afraid for my child and loved ones. My daughter is nervous, afraid of enemies, and worried that her toys will be taken away from her. I still don't believe that this has happened to my homeland.
Hello, my name is Olga. I came from Vinnytsia in Ukraine on the 1st of March. I'm with my children, Lyubov and Michael. I'm staying in Warsaw in Polish family. I have left my husband and my mother in Ukraine. My husband is in the territorial defense of the city, and my mother lives in Kherson region, is the southern part of Ukraine, where the hottest battles are taking place. The Polish people are really kind, helpful. My faith means to me that despite what is happening in my country, the world is full of kind, sympathetic people. Since the war, I'm feeling scared for the lives of loved ones. I cry every time I see people trying to help us. Every time I read the news from Ukraine with tears.
Olga, Natalia and Solmia. Father Damien Cheniak of the Jesuit Refugee Service is on the line now from Warsaw. Good morning.
Good morning.
Numbers of this kind are a huge challenge to any country to take in. The church is obviously a very big presence in Polish life. To what extent have religious organizations been able to take up the challenge?
Yeah, we are very involved right now, and Jesuit parishes, as Jesuit parishes, we organize apartments in the parish families like the ones for Olga and Natalia. And our volunteers try to gather funds for them, gather all the supplies they need immediately. And it's not only Jesuit parishes, it's parishes all over Poland. We need to say out loud. Yeah.
Listening to those interviews, one thing, of course, that's striking is that most of these families will be temporarily broken families because the men have, and the brothers and the fathers have been left behind. Does that make things just that bit more difficult?
Absolutely. It's more difficult. Like they need our support, they need our love, they need our closeness. We need to be with them because the closest people in their life, they cannot be there with them. So they need this support from us. And we want to provide psychological help as well. And we do that as GRS Poland and Jesuit communities in Poland as well.
And do you think, it may be a little early to say on this question, but do you think that most of them are going to stay in Poland, or are some of them already thinking about moving on to other countries?
It's changing. The reality is very dynamic right now and chaotic, I would say. In Poland, the transition of the refugees is huge. I know about plenty of people going abroad from Poland, going to Italy, France, Germany, but there is more and more staying. It depends what connections they have, where they have their families, cousins, and so on.
And those that do stay will need rather more, I mean, assuming things continue as they are doing it in Ukraine, they'll need rather more than immediate basic help, won't they? They'll need...
Absolutely.
Yeah. Are you able, in a position to provide, I don't know, things like schooling, I suppose?
Yeah. So right now we live in a tension to organize the direct help in Poland or in Ukraine, where we have the community in Lviv and Khmelnytsky, the retreat houses that were transformed to receive, to host refugees fleeing from the country. So this is our direct help, but our point and aim is to organize long-term help, like education for children. And we need to gather scholarship for them.
Father Damien, thank you very much indeed for joining us this morning. Now, a couple of weeks ago, we reported the experience of a curate from Barmston in Yorkshire, Richard Townend, who tweeted a picture of an empty church after turning up to take a service and finding no takers. He's got back in touch to let us know that the weekend after our broadcast, 14 people came to the Sunday service in the same church. We asked him about his reaction, and we've spoken to people from the village who've launched what they're calling a Bums on Pews campaign.
I'm the Reverend Rich Townend. I am a curate and priest serving in the parish of Bridlington with Barmston. Well, on Sunday, we turned up for our all-age service, not really expecting much, and the door kept on opening and people kept coming in. And we were absolutely delighted to have a lively and engaged congregation.
I'm Anne-Marie Wasling, and I'm currently living in Driffield. I've heard that the church is under threat of closure, and I've started a campaign, Bums on Pews. So on social media, there is now a campaign to get people to go to the church to stop it from closing.
People had heard from the programme that obviously we had been struggling at Barmston Church. They'd also heard from the local community. Word has filtered around that actually we are having a meeting soon to discuss the future of this church. And that comes on the back of a diminishing number of parishioners attending our weekly communions. It seems that people have shown that they are keen the church building remains open for public worship.
I don't usually go to church, but because I really passionately want the church to stay open, I've decided to start going to Barmston Church. You can't really start a campaign without actually being one of the people to go. So me and my family went on Sunday and really enjoyed the service.
I have to say that it was an all-age service, but we didn't have any children, which made the action songs that we'd planned quite interesting. But people did get involved, and they seemed to enjoy being part of this communal act of worship.
My name is Margaret Marshall. I live in the village of Barmston. Well, I knew the church was struggling, been struggling for quite a while. So we are doing all we can to sort of, try to keep it open. The church to me holds so many memories of like love and loss because my mum and dad were married there. Me and my sister had a double wedding. My 3 girls were married there. Grandparents and my mum and dad, sisters, uncles and aunties, and my husband are all buried there. It's like when you go into the church, it's like memories, but it's love and loss. But you feel warmer when you go in.
I've been part of the restoration group, and it was restored just in time for our daughter's wedding in 2003. Unfortunately, my husband died, and his ashes are also interred in the churchyard. Another reason why it's a special place for us. The reaction to the Bums on Pews has been great. We've had loads of likes and messages of support on the social media groups I manage, and the local newspaper are behind us as well.
It did make me more hopeful that people turned up. It did show that the church is important to people. We believe in a God who loves his people and wants them to be in relationship with him. And the church is the vehicle for doing that. We don't just want to see the bums on the pews. We actually want to see people standing up and doing the readings, and people joyfully serving tea and coffee and welcoming people at the door. That's what community is. It's actually about the people. The church is the people coming together to worship the living God on behalf of their local community. And that's what we'd love to see happening in Barmston week to week.
Barmston's bums back on pews. The time is 28 minutes to 8. You're listening to Sunday. Still to come in the programme, the Catholic radio station that's still broadcasting defiantly from Kiev despite the war raging around the city.
It's our decision to stay here, to stay with our people, to stay in our city, to pray with these people, to give some hope.
Last week's programme included an item about Ukraine's Jewish community and their history. That history took centre stage a couple of days later when a Russian missile hit the Holocaust Memorial at Babi Yar on the outskirts of Kiev. More than 30,000 Jews were murdered there over 2 days in September 1941. Yakov Blige is Ukraine's chief rabbi. He's also on the supervisory board of the Babi Yar Holocaust Memorial Center, and he joins us from New York. And thank you very much, Rabbi, for staying up so late to talk to us and joining the program.
Good morning.
Good morning. And can you tell me a little bit more about Babi Yar, because that September 1941 event was a particularly shocking example of what happened there, but the killing went on pretty relentlessly throughout the war, didn't it?
Yes, indeed. It was the first mass murder of Jews during World War II took place in Babi Yar, where the Nazis rounded up the Jews and killed, according to their records, 33,771 Jews over those 2 days of September 29th and 30th in 1941. And bear in mind that did not include small children, that count. And unfortunately, that was the beginning of a very, very murderous trend that began there. And as they say, it began there, but it didn't end there.
So it is the memorial there, which was hit by a missile, is an enormously important recognition of what happened in Ukraine during the Second World War.
Yeah, well, it wasn't the actual memorial. It was not hit now, but the territory.
Right.
The Babi Yar is a very, very large territory, which includes the old Jewish cemetery. And I say that the Jews were killed once by the fascists and the Germans and their henchmen in 1941. However, they were killed again when the Soviets didn't allow them to put up a memorial there, and the memory of those that were killed was sort of wiped out. And finally, in 1991, when Ukraine got its independence, we started to rebuild the memory of the people in Babi Yar, and it really has become quite a place over the last 5 or 6 years since the Babi Yar Holocaust Memorial Center was created. and they were able to put up a number of different things, including a very unique synagogue there as a memorial to those that were killed, field mirrors, and other things. So these monuments were not hit. However, the territory of the old Jewish cemetery was hit, right behind the what used to be the administrative building of the cemetery.
Given that history, it's remarkable that there is now really, we had this on the program last week, really quite a thriving Jewish community in Ukraine, isn't there?
Yeah, there is quite a thriving Jewish community, and it is quite a miracle. I agree with you. It's very, very an interesting thing, since as far as the Nazis were concerned, Kiev was Judenrein, which was clean of all Jews during that time, 1941 to 43. But the Jewish community did rebuild, indeed, even though organized Jewish life was not allowed under the Soviets. However, with the breakup of the Soviet Union, which only saw one synagogue in the city and barely a quorum coming to pray there, it went from that to becoming a very thriving Jewish community with synagogues, 8 or 9 synagogues throughout the city, which unfortunately today are almost all closed over the last week because of the Russian attacks.
And you, as I said, are now in New York. You clearly felt you had to go, did you, when the war began?
Yes, well, I left right before the war began. On basically the last day of civilian flights, we were warned that there will be no flights out, and it was getting to be a bit dangerous.
And as I understand it, you are, while you're in New York, while you're in the United States, you're trying to drum up financial support and aid and so forth to help the Jewish community that remains in Ukraine. Is that right?
Yeah. Well, the first thing was to help those that are in danger, to try and get them and help them to evacuate from the cities that are being bombed and shot at. So that's something that's taking a lot of time. Beginning, it was difficult for people to even understand the severity and the real danger they were in. It's hitting people now.
Well, of course, one of the big changes is that Ukraine has a Jewish president now. Are you in touch with him?
If I'm in touch with him on a regular basis during normal peacetime, and indeed we spoke after the war began a week ago, when the president reached out to me and asked that the Jewish community pray for the soldiers, for those that are protecting and fighting for Ukraine, for Ukraine's freedom, Ukraine's survival. And I told him we are praying in any case. But he said, yeah, well, we need even more prayers now because we're so outnumbered. The only way we're going to win this is if God is with us.
Well, with that thought, we will leave it. Chief Rabbi, thank you very much indeed for joining us. The signature of Radio Maria, a Catholic network that has been broadcasting from Kiev for the past decade and more. It is still broadcasting today, despite the fighting, albeit with a much diminished staff. Father Alexei Samsonov is the station's director of programs, doubling as a presenter in the current stressful circumstances, and spoke to me from Radio Maria's studios. He told me what was happening around him.
Streets in Kiev now are empty. No people, no cars. Great number of population left the capital. The shops are closed, not all, but the most part.
Tell me a little bit about Radio Maria. It is a Christian radio station, isn't it? And that presumably dictates very much the kind of thing you broadcast. What are you broadcasting at the moment?
On the first day of war, we organized a special spiritual part of our broadcasting. I mean, the prayer of Rosary, the broadcasting of the Mass. We have, I think, 10 or 20 parish in Ukraine. From this parish, we can transmit the Mass. And now I see the number of people who listen, especially the Rosary, the Mass, are growing up. Okay, first of all, we organize this spiritual part. And the second thing, we organize a live program to speak with people. I think 3 hours a day we stay in the studio to speak with people.
Let me just ask you about that, though. You say you're asking people to ring in with their experiences. What sort of things are they telling you?
Okay, the first days, maybe first 2 or 3 days, people were very shocked by this war. A lot of panic, a lot of fears. But that is in the one side, one hand. But another people say about the love to Ukraine, love to the Christ, to the God, and people say that they are ready to defend Ukraine. It was surprised. And another thing, people looking to receive information how they can help to other people, how they can to organize some aid, some not only spiritual but medical aid. For example, in one city, hospital needs blood. People go to this hospital to give this blood for our soldiers, for our people who were injured in this moment.
And it sounds as if the radio station is playing a very important and valuable role in the life of the nation at this very difficult time.
I think before the war, we had 100,000 listeners of radio. Now it's much more. We have not only people who belong to some church, a lot of other people, atheists and agnostic, listen us and call us. People want to find something, someone who can help, and people looking for this God in this radio. Now we have more than 8 hours of praying, different prayers, Mass, Rosary, pray to Divine Mercy, and so on.
Do you worry at all about the possibility of the Russians closing you down if indeed they do take the area where you are?
Yes, I thought about it, not, but it's our decision to stay here, to stay with our people, to stay in our city, because I think I'm a priest. It's my mission to be with my people, to pray with these people, to give some hope, the gospel of God. But I believe in our army. I think it will be very difficult for Russian to take our city, because Ukraine now are ready to defend. For us, it's something like a Bible story, the story of David and Goliath. We are the David, the small, and Russia is Goliath. We need your help, really, really. We need help of UK, of spiritual help, and another help, because really it's the situation. It's difficult, but we don't lost our hope yet. And I'm sure we will win. Depend how much does it cost? How much blood does it cost?
Yeah. Alexei Samsonov talking to me earlier. I reported before on this program that Vladimir Putin is very close to the Russian Orthodox Church, and the Moscow Patriarch Kirill has been reluctant to condemn what the Russian president has ordered in Ukraine. But Patriarch Kirill is under pressure from within his own church. Russian Orthodox priests around the world are speaking out against the invasion of Ukraine, and hundreds have signed an open letter calling for peace. Our religious affairs reporter Harry Farley went to an Orthodox parish in Durham, where Russians and Ukrainians worship together.
It's Forgiveness Sunday in the Orthodox Church calendar today, and I've just stepped outside an Orthodox church in Durham. Inside, the congregation is made up of both Russians and Ukrainians. Their countries may be at war, but here they stand side by side. I'm just looking in now, and the priest is now bowing to the congregation. And the congregation now bows to each other. It's part of a ritual for the Orthodox Church on this Forgiveness Sunday. And it's strange to think that on the same continent, the Russian government is bombing Ukrainian cities. But here they're at peace, and they're asking each other for forgiveness. the service is over now, and I've come outside with the priest who took the service, Father Andrew of the Russian Orthodox Church.
I think it's the job of the church to speak up against power. All too often the church is colluded with political authorities. There's a real deep danger in doing this. And I'm deeply ashamed, really. I'm deeply ashamed of the behavior of Kirill. This is a disgusting Game of Thrones, as it were, in which lots of people are suffering.
In Russia, it's forbidden to even call the conflict a war. But I spoke to one priest from the Russian Orthodox Church who lives in Moscow, who's clear about the reality.
What matters is that people die. Many people lose their lives, and this is a crime.
What would your message be to President Putin?
To stop the war, to stop before it is too late. Although I'm afraid, unfortunately, I think it is too late.
Are you scared about speaking out?
No, I'm afraid because there are some priorities in life. There are situations where it is not possible not to speak the truth, no matter how scary it is.
Religion matters to Vladimir Putin. It's part of the image he tries to portray as a strong leader defending conservative Christian values against a decadent West. Before he invaded, he said Ukraine shared a spiritual space with Russia. In Putin's mind, Moscow is not just a great political power, it's a great religious one too. The heir to the Kievan Rus Empire that saw the foundational moment that led to the birth of the Eastern Orthodox Church. He's always enjoyed great support from the head of the Russian Orthodox Church, Patriarch Kirill. But here in Durham and also in Moscow, Orthodox priests are speaking out against Putin's war.
Harry Farley reporting on. I'm joined now by Father Stephen Platt, who is the Secretary for Inter-Christian Affairs of the Russian Orthodox Church in Great Britain and Ireland. Good morning.
Good morning.
We heard your fellow priest, Father Andrew in Durham there, say he was ashamed because the leadership of the church in Moscow has not condemned this war. Would you share that sentiment?
Well, like Father Andrew, I was one of the signatories to the letter which you referred to a few moments ago. I think that it's not entirely true to say that the church has distanced itself from the war in Ukraine, but the situation is complex. We have a patriarch who is the primate of a church with faithful people both in Ukraine and in Russia. And we have a relationship between the Russian Orthodox Church and the Russian state, which is not quite as clear-cut as people would like to make out in the Western media.
Well, I'm not quite sure what you mean by that, but in any circumstances, shouldn't the leader of a church be able to condemn outright what is happening in Ukraine at the moment, an unprovoked invasion and terrible suffering by civilians who have no place in any war?
Yes, it would. In fact, although the patriarch called for all parties in the conflict to do everything possible to avoid civilian casualties, I'm quoting from his address, his appeal, it would have been indeed much more helpful if he had been more specific in calling for an outright end to all war. But
couldn't he just be more straightforward than that and say, this is wrong? What is being done is immoral by any standard, and certainly by the standard of Christian ethics in this area.
The Orthodox Church worldwide always prays for peace. The Orthodox Church works for peace, and perhaps it could be that the Patriarch is not at liberty to make explicit statements calling for peace.
What do you mean not at liberty? I mean, do you mean he'd actually be locked up if he did that?
Well, at the moment, yes. Ever since 2 days ago, any criticism of the a war in Ukraine from the part of Russia has become an imprisonable offence.
Well, as you know, a lot of people will look at the position and say, actually, it's a bit more straightforward than that. The patriarch is in Putin's pocket. They've always been close, and that's why he's not willing to speak out as he should.
Yes, the church in Russia, as you will be aware, has never really had complete freedom. For hundreds of years, the church in Russia has been, first of all, at the disposal of the Russian Empire. Then, for many decades, we, as Orthodox in the West, were used to having to interpret what the church was saying in Russia when it was in a period of Soviet domination. I'm not sure that the position is entirely different now.
Does that make it uncomfortable, particularly at a time like this, for you as not just a member of that church, but as a priest in that church?
Extremely. And I think that for those of us who are here in the West or belong to the Russian Orthodox Church in countries outside of the Russian Federation, there is a unique calling to try to work to speak the truth and to also try to point out the complexities of the situation from a position that is straddling two worlds.
And just to pick up on another point, this idea that Ukraine and Russia share some kind of sacred space, which indeed that the patriarch referred to in a sermon, I think, last week, that clearly should not be the basis for justifying a war.
No, the Russian and Ukrainian peoples, and in fact all of those of us who belong to the tradition of the Russian Orthodox and Ukrainian and Slav Orthodox world, which stems from the baptism of Kievan Rus in 988, do share the same spiritual space. And our spiritual space is descended ultimately from the Orthodox faith that we received from Constantinople. The Orthodox world has the root in its Constantinopolitan in its Constantinopolitan expression, which was experienced by the envoys of Prince Vladimir. But to say that that world is coterminous with political boundaries is a mistake.
Well, more than a mistake, isn't it? You don't have to drive tanks all over the country to enforce that space.
Absolutely.
Do you worry that this is going to do very serious, well, it will do very serious damage to the standing of the Russian Orthodox Church more generally, won't it? It's seeing the patriarch, the man who everyone looks to for leadership, failing to speak out on the great moral question of the age, you might say.
I think that it has already been the cause of damage. I think we also have to accept the fact that the patriarch is working in a more diplomatic way behind the scenes in ways that he cannot express his position publicly. I know, for example, and you will have seen of his meeting with the Apostolic Nuncio recently, I know that communication channels are open between him and representatives of other Christian churches, including the Church of England. And we should not underestimate what is going on quietly behind the scenes.
We must leave it there. Father Stephen Platt, thank you very much indeed for joining us. That's it for this week's Sunday. If you'd like to comment on today's programme, the email is sunday@bbc.co.uk, or you can write to us, Stockhouse Media, City UK, Salford M50 2LH. William Crawley will be in the chair next week. Enjoy the rest of your Sunday.
I'm afraid I wasn't listening with much attention about what the Orthodox priest said. But what I caught was that he said that the Orthodox Church has been a creature of the Tsars, and you would expect now for the Orthodox Church to be a creature of Putin, and obviously Russia is itself divided about the situation in the Ukraine, and I don't think look, I mean, the whole role of Christianity, the church, is that it was meant to be a creature of the absolute monarch. I mean, I keep trying to explain it to you. I don't know if you get it, but if I keep saying it a few more times, perhaps enough of you will. So, really, there are no instructions in the New Testament that could be said to be from God. The most you have is Sermon on the Mount, and it is drivel. Face it, you can't use any of that to guide you in statecraft. You just can't. So the better guide would be the Quran. There's a few words of guidance in the Torah, but it's not enough, and it only applies to Jews. So if you're going to be logical about it, if you want to believe in the most powerful God conceivable, you have to get your instructions from the Quran if you believe in the Abrahamic God. And if you believe in the Abrahamic God, then you have to be mindful of his prohibition against idolatry and blasphemy in the Ten Commandments, which is repeated in the Noahide laws. There is no getting around that. And I know you will be asking, oh, what's wrong with idolatry and blasphemy? And ask yourselves, what would happen to Jews if they all practiced idolatry? They wouldn't exist. They just wouldn't be around anymore, right? They'd merge with the surrounding Gentiles because they would worship the same gods. And they just wouldn't be around for Christianity to be created and then for the Quran to be revealed to correct the errors of Christianity. So understand the role of the Jews. And actually, I don't want them to convert to Islam, even though I have all the arguments. I want them to stay Jews in order to help Muslims jointly ask the Pope and the Archbishop of Canterbury and the patriarchs of the Orthodox Church how and why Christianity is not idolatry and blasphemy, and if they're going to defend themselves predictably by saying it's not idolatry and blasphemy if Jesus is God, then they have to ask the follow-up question: how and why is Jesus God? And they won't be able to answer coherently or properly or even have the same answer. And you will see how ridiculous the whole thing is. So, to repeat, the church was always meant to support the divine right of kings. Yes, you can understand that. And there is no need now for the church to support the divine right of kings to rule, because the age of absolute monarchy has come and gone. So really, the church is an anachronism. There is no political purpose to it now, because we don't live in an age of absolute monarchy, nor would we wish to return to it. And so, Christianity is just not suitable for the purposes of Western man in the 21st century. In fact, it started breaking down since the Reformation. I mean, what was the Reformation about but Christians fighting amongst themselves as to what kind of Christian to be? And once upon a time, all Christians were Catholic. And the first time Christianity became a state religion was to support the divine right of Constantine the Great to rule the Roman Empire. And that was always its purpose. So obviously it would break down as human civilization progressed and barbarian kings became literate So you can imagine the barbarian tribes of Europe, when they had kings, did not have literate kings until Tudor times, the Middle Ages. So it is important to understand your own history. And, I've told you about how the last person to be burnt at the stake in 1612, well, that was the last time this disgusting punishment was meted out to someone. And his name was Edward Whiteman, and he was an Anabaptist. And an Anabaptist is basically somebody who rejected infant baptism because it wasn't considered fair to baptize somebody and claim that infant to be now a member of the church when it obviously had no view about the divinity of Jesus. And talking about the Orthodox Church, you may be interested in knowing about the process called chrismation. So this is what the Orthodox Church do to Orthodox infants, or the infants of parents who are Orthodox. They just do this thing. I think they rub this oil or something on the infant's legs, and then they say, this is it. That child is one of us now, right? But for the Catholic Church and the Anglican Church, there is this further process, ceremony called confirmation. So it would be around the age of 13, and this is also the age of understanding and criminal responsibility as far as the Jewish boy undergoing the ceremony of the bar mitzvah would be made to understand. So a boy undergoing his bar mitzvah ceremony will be told that his sins from that time onwards will be his own, when previously it would be added on to the sins of his parents. So age 13 is the age of criminal responsibility. And you can see now that the Christian ceremonies of infant baptism and the confirmation ceremony in adolescence is the mirroring of the customs of Judaism. So the circumcision, the Brit, within 8 days of the child's birth, is meant to just say, look, you're one of us now, because every time you look down there, you'll know that you're one of us. So that was what it was all about. So Christians had a somewhat different ceremony, but the purpose is exactly the same. But the Orthodox Church cheated in saying that, it'll be very difficult to get these poor Orthodox parents who drag their kid to church and then undergo this confirmation ceremony for which there is instruction. So there will be, confirmation classes that you will have to force your usually rebellious adolescent to go to, and we know the breakdown of parental discipline in the last 50 years. So parents, even if they consider themselves Anglican, just can't get it together to get their kid to go to church. So basically that's all gone out the window now in the West. But reflect upon this, about what Nietzsche said in the 1870s, when he said, God is dead and we have killed him. What did he mean by that? Other than that belief in the Trinity is dead, and liberals have killed it with their liberalism. Why did he say that in 1871? Because there has been a conflict between church and state in Germany, because Germany was going through all kinds of political maneuverings and changes in government administration because of the move towards German unification. And it was basically, well, pushing aside the role of the Catholic Church, and that was why the Catholic Church proclaimed a papal bull declaring the Pope to be infallible on matters of doctrine. But I know you don't understand your own history, and you care less, and you think it's enough for liberalism to function as the moral system of the West, and you already know what you think of this idea if you ever agreed with it in the first place. So what is liberalism but a changing, amorphous set of rules that are whatever your liberal national leader says it is? And also notice that liberalism is deep down synonymous with conservatism. So conservatism is basically the junior partner of liberalism, because it was under conservatism that gay marriage was legalized in Britain. And also consider, Dr. Mengele, that in Australia, the Liberal Party is really the Conservative Party. So this is so fucked up, and you haven't even noticed it. You don't even care. So what is the danger of having a supposed political orthodoxy that your politicians can just change at will? You will become, well, I'm afraid you will become like the Hindus. So you can just merrily contradict your own religious doctrines and be made to believe in the nonsense by the immoral liars who claim, well, who presume to rule you. Now, with Islam, with the Quran, at least you can, well, if you can read, you can, well, refer to the book and say, look, where is the authority for your proposition to legalize gay marriage when it is a sexual offense in the Quran? So I think you're getting the idea. Well, I hope Dr. Mengele does, because I know he's a bit slow and he's not interested in theology. Right, I see, Tinkle Tink, that you were banned from the Amy Newman channel. They're so hypocritical, aren't they? They sent me a message saying, I can't even remember, but it was just so pompous and hypocritical. Got it? Oh, well, got it has got it. Thank you for getting my explanation. Joe is here. Of course, my YouTube is my second home. Thank you for your kind words, Got it. I think Got it has got it. Are you Muslim? No, Dr. Mengele. Alison is out. She's got a court case coming in April. The one she had in February was adjourned. Good question, Rune Skitzing. I'd like to think Rabbi Schneerson would have approved, or he would have enjoyed disapproving of it. Oh, I seem to have a marriage proposal from Got It. Thank you. It's always nice to collect them. Vincent has lost his channel. He went too far, but you can still find him on Facebook if you want. I think I did have him on my channel after his channel was mute. I think Joe's from the north. Nietzsche did talk about Christianity because he was concerned about the morals of the German people, because they didn't really believe that Jesus was God, and they were no longer burned at the stake if they denied the divinity of Jesus. So that was a bit of a problem in Britain since 1813, after the doctrine of the Trinity Act was passed. British Christians could deny the Trinity without suffering, loss of status, loss of employment. But before, if you weren't Anglican, you couldn't go to, universities, and a lot of many forms of employment would be denied to you. So there was discrimination against the Christians of the wrong kind. And, Newton nearly couldn't get into Cambridge because he wasn't prepared to say that he believed that Jesus was God. But somehow or other, I forget the details now, he was able to get in. The requirements were dispensed for him. But yeah, that was how oppressive it was. So you shouldn't be surprised that the Americans, when they could, when it was safe for them to do so, just refused to incorporate the church into their state. They had to, quarantine that virus. And that was what they did. And that was when, the Christianity went into a more advanced stage of decay. So if you think of the Reformation, it was only during the Reformation that Christians in Europe thought there was a problem with Christianity, because they had a European wars of religion. So it was all, inextricably tied up with their politics, because the whole point of Catholicism was that European monarchs obtained support for their divine right to rule from the Catholic Church. And that was why the Catholic Church was, kicking all these kings around. And for that Henry II, in the 1100s, I think, he was already getting really pissed off with the Pope. Henry was the one who inadvertently, accidentally, on purpose. Well, I guess he did express remorse, because he wore sackcloth and ashes after the assassination of Thomas à Becket at Canterbury Cathedral by these two knights who thought they were doing the king his bidding. Because Thomas à Becket was he was Henry's friend, or so he thought, until he made him Archbishop of Canterbury, and then he did everything as a Pope wanted him to do, and that was insufferable. So this is the history of the monarchy and the Catholic Church, and it wasn't a very good one. King John was subject to an interdict by the Catholic Church, meaning that his soul was in mortal danger if he didn't come round to the Pope's view on whatever, I forget now. And it also meant that his subjects too were, had their mortal soul endangered if King John didn't come round. I'm trying to remember look it up. King John was maybe not such a bad king, since he opened up the port of Liverpool. And Magna Carta, Magna Carta isn't this, thing that's peculiar to the English. Anybody can say, "Oh, I've got it down in writing, so it must mean you have to follow it." But King John said, "No, I was under duress." So we can be grateful, or lawyers can be grateful to King John for the concept of duress, vitiating a contract. Basically saying, if you force somebody into entering a contract, then you can't enforce it because you forced. Because a contract has to be entered into of your own free will. That is the whole point of it. So now I'm looking up for you why King John had a spot of bother with the Pope. And John was the youngest of the surviving sons of Henry II, who was a Plantagenet. So it was, this problem came up quite a long time ago. Dispute with the Pope and excommunication. There you go. Yeah, I know it's not the history you learned at school. But you should understand that it's always been a very tense and troubled relationship. So really, the Reformation was inevitable, in the end. The monarchs just couldn't stand it anymore, being told whom they could or couldn't marry, and they say, well, we can read now, we don't need you to interpret, So when people like E. Michael Jones, they really don't get it. They don't get it that it's, inevitable. So Protestantism, in my view, it's just an inevitable expression of national self-consciousness. So it wasn't some, evil thing that E. Michael Jones and other Catholics were making it out to be. It was natural and inevitable because of the defects, the design defects of Christianity. Actually, I'm going to do King John, and then I go back to Henry II, if you're still around. Dispute with the Pope and excommunication. When the Archbishop of Canterbury, Hubert Walter, died on 13th July 1205, John became involved in a dispute with Pope Innocent III that would lead to the king's excommunication. The Norman and Angevin kings had traditionally exercised a great deal of power over the church within their territories. From the 1040s onwards, however, successive popes had put forward a reforming message that emphasized the importance of the church being governed more coherently and more hierarchically from the center, and established its own sphere of authority and jurisdiction, separate from and independent of that of the lay ruler. In the words of historian Richard Huscroft, after the 1140s, these principles had been largely accepted within the English Church, albeit with an element of concern about centralizing authority in Rome. These changes brought the customary rights of lay rulers such as John over ecclesiastical appointments into question. Pope Innocent was, according to historian Ralph Turner, an ambitious and aggressive religious leader, insistent on his rights and responsibilities within the church. John wanted John de Grey, the Bishop of Norwich and one of his own supporters, to be appointed Archbishop of Canterbury, but the cathedral chapter for Canterbury Cathedral claimed the exclusive right to elect the Archbishop. They favoured Reginald, the chapter's sub-prior. To complicate matters, the bishops of the province of Canterbury also claimed the right to appoint the next Archbishop. The chapter secretly elected Reginald, and he travelled to Rome to be confirmed. The bishops challenged the appointment, and the matter was taken before Innocent. John forced the Canterbury chapter to change the support to John de Grey, and a messenger was sent to Rome to inform the papacy of the new decision. Innocent disavowed both Reginald and John de Grey, and instead appointed his own candidate, Stephen Langton. John refused Innocent's request that he consent to Langton's appointment, but the Pope consecrated Langton anyway in June 1207. Can you imagine how infuriating that must have been? John was incensed about what he perceived as an abrogation of his customary right as monarch to influence the election. He complained both about the choice of Langton as an individual, as John felt he was overly influenced by the Capetian court in Paris, and about the process as a whole. He barred Langton from entering England and seized the land of the archbishopric and other papal possessions. Innocent set a commission in place to try to convince John to change his mind, but to no avail. Innocent then placed an interdict on England in March 1208, prohibiting clergy from conducting religious services with the exception of baptisms for the young and confessions and absolutions for the dying. Outrageous. John treated the interdict as the equivalent of a papal declaration of war. He responded by attempting to punish Innocent personally and to drive a wedge between those English clergy that might support him and those allying themselves firmly with the authorities in Rome. John seized the lands of those clergy unwilling to conduct services, as well as those estates linked to Innocent himself. He arrested the illicit concubines that many clerics kept during the period, releasing them only after the payment of fines. He seized the lands of members of the church who fled England, and he promised protection for those clergy willing to remain loyal to him. In many cases, individual institutions were able to negotiate terms for managing their own properties and keeping the produce of their estates. By 1209, the situation showed no signs of resolution, and Innocent threatened to excommunicate John if he did not acquiesce to Langton's appointment. When this threat failed, Innocent excommunicated the king in November 1209. Although theoretically a significant blow to John's legitimacy, this did not appear to worry the king greatly. Two of John's close allies, Emperor Otto IV and Count Raymond VI of Toulouse, had already suffered the same punishments themselves, and the significance of excommunication had been somewhat devalued. John simply tightened his existing measures and accrued significant sums from the income of vacant sees and abbeys. 11213 estimate, for example, suggested the church had lost an estimated 100,000 marks, equivalent to £66,666 at the time, to John. Official figures suggest suggests that around 14% of annual income from the English church was being appropriated by John each year. Innocent gave some dispensations as the crisis progressed. Monastic communities were allowed to celebrate Mass in private from 1209 onwards, and late in 1212 the Holy Viaticum for the dying was authorized. The rules on burials and lay access to church appear to have been steadily circumvented, at least unofficially. Although the interdict was a burden to much of the population, it did not result in rebellion against John. By 1213, though, John was increasingly worried about the threat of French invasion. Some contemporary chroniclers suggested that in January, Philip II of France had been charged with deposing John on behalf of the papacy, although it appears that Innocent merely prepared secret letters in case Innocent needed to claim the credit if Philip did successfully invade England. Last paragraph now. Under mounting political pressure, John finally negotiated terms for a reconciliation, and the papal terms of submission were accepted in the presence of the papal legate Pandulph Verraccio in May 1213 at the Templar Church at Dover. As part of the deal, John offered to surrender the Kingdom of England to the papacy for a feudal service of 1,000 marks, equivalent to £666 at the time, annually 700 marks. £466 for England and 300 marks, £200 for Ireland, as well as recompensing the church for revenue lost during the crisis. The agreement was formalized in the Bulla Aurea, or Golden Bull. This resolution produced mixed responses. Although some chroniclers felt that John had been humiliated by the sequence of events, there was little public reaction. Innocent benefited from the resolution of his long-standing English problem, but John probably gained more, as Innocent became a firm supporter of John for the rest of his reign, backing him in both domestic and continental policy issues. Innocent immediately turned against Philip, calling him to reject plans to invade England and to sue for peace. John paid some of the compensation money he had promised the church, but he ceased making payments in late 1214, leaving 2/3 of the sum unpaid. Innocent appears to have conveniently forgotten this debt for the good of the wider relationship. Now, I wanted to consider why Henry II was having his papal problems. And I go there now. It was Thomas à Becket, I told you. One of the major international events surrounding Henry during the 1160s was the Becket controversy. When the Archbishop of Canterbury, Theobald of Bec, died in 1161, Henry saw an opportunity to reassert his rights over the Church in England. Henry appointed Thomas à Becket his English Chancellor as Archbishop in 1162, probably believing that Becket, in addition to being an old friend, would be politically weakened within the Church because of his former role as Chancellor, and would therefore have to rely on Henry's support. Both Henry's mother and wife appear to have had doubts about the appointment, but nevertheless he continued. His plan did not have the desired result, as Becket promptly changed his lifestyle, abandoned his links to the king, and portrayed himself as staunch protector of church rights. Henry and Becket quickly disagreed over several issues, including Becket's attempts to regain control of lands belonging to the archbishopric and his views on Henry's taxation policies. The main source of conflict concerned the treatment of clergy who committed secular crimes. Henry argued that the legal custom in England allowed the king to enforce justice over these clerics, while Becket maintained that only church courts could try the cases. One law for the clerics and another for the lay people. Hardly justice, is it? The matter came to a head in January 1164 when Henry forced through agreement to the constitutions of Clarendon. I don't know what that is. What is it? The constitutions of Clarendon were a set of legislative procedures passed by Henry II of England in 1164. The constitutions were composed of 16 articles and represented an attempt to restrict ecclesiastical privileges and curb the power of the church courts and the extent of papal authority in England. In the anarchic conditions of Henry II's predecessor, Stephen, the church had extended its jurisdiction by taking advantage of the weakness of royal authority. The constitutions were claimed to restore the law it was observed during the reign of Henry II. Okay, I get it now. Right. Where was I? The legal argument was complex at the time and remains contentious. You people, you don't know what Christianity has done to you, and you still won't admit it. And Islam would just make everything so much fairer and clearer, but you won't accept it because of your Islamophobia. To continue, the argument between Henry and Becket became both increasingly personal and international in nature. Henry was stubborn and bore grudges, while Becket was vain, ambitious, and overly political. Neither man was willing to back down. Both sought the support of Pope Alexander III and other international leaders, arguing their positions in various forums across Europe. The situation worsened in 1164 when Becket fled to France to seek sanctuary with Louis VII. Henry harassed Becket's associates in England, and Becket excommunicated religious and secular officials who sided with the king. It's like a playground dispute, isn't it? I'm not going to talk to you anymore, and I'm not going to talk to anyone who talks to you. The Pope supported Becket's case in principle, but needed Henry's support in dealing with Frederick I, Holy Roman Emperor, so he repeatedly sought a negotiated solution. The Norman Church was also intervened to try to assist Henry in finding a solution. So there was a Norman Church. This is getting a bit confusing. I don't know about the Norman Church. So I guess the Norman Church was a little bit more independent of the Catholic Church. Yes, is that how it is? I should look it up, really. Norman churches in England. Okay, there's a quick little snippet from GCSE, the BBC GCSE website, called The Church in Norman. No, maybe that's not what I want. I want something about. Okay, maybe that will be okay. The church in Norman, England. I assumed it was Catholic. The church in Norman, England was hugely significant. Religion played a pivotal part in everyday life for all walks of life. The organisation, structure, and administration of the church influenced society on many levels. The Normans made changes to the church. The Saxon bishops were replaced. Ecclesiastical law was changed. Its role within society altered. The relationship of the church to the monarchy and papacy altered. When William of Normandy decided to invade England, he sought the blessing of the Pope. With papal blessing, his position as challenger, then king, was justified. The society and church that the Normans inherited was well organized. It was also a very important mechanism for the new Norman lords to implement their rules. The church already had experienced elements of Norman influence, as Edward the Confessor had appointed Robert of Jumièges as Archbishop of Canterbury. Okay, I didn't know. Okay. At the time of the invasion of England, the church in England was dominated by the bishopric sees of Canterbury and York. These oversaw a further 14 dioceses, which in turn ran numerous parishes. Most English churches had adapted to the Roman tradition of church services. There were some that continued to use Celtic traditions, mainly in areas bordering Scotland and Wales. William did not want two equal bishoprics. It was easier for him to work with one as a dominant force. He moved to make Canterbury the leading see. This led to the Canterbury-York dispute running for some time. Okay, I didn't know that. The church itself saw minor and major orders of people working within it. Minor orders are those roles that were carried out by ordinary lay people on a day-to-day basis. These roles haven't changed much. They included such things as being on the door, cleaning the church, etc. Major orders are the roles that people were trained for. These are deacons, priests, and bishops. Within parishes, it was these people who offered comfort, advice, and oversaw the giving of sacraments. They led the celebration of feast days. They were central to the local society. Monasteries had developed in Saxon England. They played a role in both society and the economy of their localities. They could be large landowners with laypersons renting land from them. This made them important to the state. Politics and the church. The Normans made use of the church system. As the conquest of the country was completed, the churches that William made to laws would be most easily spread through both the landowners and the church. The church had a stable structure that had not immediately changed following the invasion. Men such as Archbishop Stigand could be used to negotiate with Saxon lords. They could be used to minimize revolts. This was the case in the early years of William's reign. Once a crown was secure, the church was altered. Lanfranc's appointment to the See of Canterbury marked the beginning of large changes in the Church of England. Well, not the church, not the Anglican Church, because that only came up in Tudor times. These were designed to align the structure with that of Normandy and also to reform the church as was being requested by successive popes of the era. Such a structure would enable William, the then future Norman monarchs, to exert a great deal of authority via the church. And changes to the English church. The process was quite quick. Following the failed... I'm quite interested in this. Only a few more paragraphs now. The process was quite quick. Following the failed rebellion of 1070, the bishops of England were almost entirely foreigners. The English being ruled by foreigners. It's a joke, isn't it? It's still happening. In the period to 1140, only one English-born bishop was appointed. Lanfranc instigated a series of reforms. Many of these were part of the Gregorian reform movement. Priests were to be unmarried and celibate. Ecclesiastical issues were to be settled in church courts. These led to a quick Normanization of the church at the upper levels, which could then feed into practices within the dioceses and parishes. One of the Gregorian demands was for archbishops to swear loyalty to the Pope over their king. Ooh. on the issue of the Norman archbishops. On this issue, the Norman archbishops had varying views. Lanfranc, for example, never did so. Anselm, however, quarrelled regularly with William Rufus over the king's interference in church matters. Who's William Rufus? Oh, right, okay. Third son of the Conqueror. And Lanfranc was an archbishop. The investiture crisis was solved in 1107 with a compromise agreement made that retained the rights of both the king and the importance of the papacy. Monasticism. Monasteries expanded rapidly in Norman England. By 1135, it is estimated that the number of monks had quadrupled to roughly 5,000. New types of monastic orders entered England. The 1070s saw Cluniac monasteries built, an expansion in the number of Augustine monasteries, and in the early 12th century, Cistercian monasteries were built. Oh, I don't know anything about that. Okay, there were different orders of the Catholic Church, I guess. At the start of Stephen's reign, there were some 250 monastic buildings in England, up from 60 at the invasion. Church architecture, I don't think you're interested in that. So, okay, so there was more independence under the Plantagenets until Pope Innocent decided to try and make all the kings sing from the same hymn sheet, so to speak, and he was only half successful, and he had to make compromises too. Okay, so back to the Thomas of Becket controversy. The argument between Henry and Becket became increasingly personal and international in nature. Henry was stubborn and bore grudges. Okay, I've just read that, sorry. Only 2 more paragraphs. By 1169, Henry had decided to crown his son, young Henry, as King of England. This required the acquiescence of the Archbishop of Canterbury, traditionally the churchman with the right to conduct the ceremony. Furthermore, the whole Becket matter was an increasingly international embarrassment to Henry. He began to take a more conciliatory tone with Becket, but when this failed, had young Henry crowned anyway by the Archbishop of York. The Pope authorised Becket to lay an interdict on England, forcing Henry back to negotiations. They finally came to terms in July 1170, and Becket returned to England in early December. Just when the dispute seemed resolved, Becket excommunicated another 3 supporters of Henry, who was furious and infamously announced, "What miserable drones and traitors have I nourished and promoted in my household, who let their lord be treated with such shameful contempt by a low-born clerk." In response, 4 knights made their way secretly to Canterbury, apparently with the intent of confronting and, if necessary, arresting Becket for breaking his agreement with Henry. The Archbishop refused to be arrested inside the sanctuary of a church, so the knights hacked him to death on 29 December 1170. This event, particularly in front of an altar, horrified Christian Europe. Although Becket had not been popular while he was alive, in death he was declared a martyr by the local monks. Louis seized on the case, and despite efforts by the Norman Church to prevent the French Church from taking action, a new interdict was announced on Henry's possessions. Remember, Henry was a Plantagenet and had French possessions. Henry was focused on dealing. Plantagenets were Normans. Henry was focused on dealing with Ireland and took no action to arrest Beckett's killers, arguing that he was unable to do so. International pressure on Henry grew, and in May 1172 he negotiated a settlement with the papacy in which the king swore to go on crusade, as well as effectively overturning the constitutions of Clarendon. In the coming years, although Henry never actually went on crusade, he exploited the growing cult of Becket for his own ends. Oh, I don't know how he did that. So was it interesting for you? I know I did read that Nietzsche said, got his head in Wikipedia. It must be true. Okay, 18 to 82. All right, I stand corrected. Mind you, it wasn't it wasn't the phrase. Was it original to him? Well, apparently, Hegel's student in 1837 was talking about this sort of thing already. German philosopher Max Stirner writes in 1844 about the death of God, about the killing of God by humans during the Enlightenment in his book, The Ego on Its Own. So it's not an idea original to Nietzsche, but it does say in Wikipedia that this phrase appeared in Nietzsche's 1882 collection, The Gay Science. However, it is most famously associated with Nietzsche's Thus Spoke Zarathustra. When was it published then? (1884), I think. Why was I talking about 1871? I think I must have mixed it up with the Kulturkampf. Yeah. Which began in 18. Let me just check in case I give you the wrong. Yeah, it was a conflict that took place from 1872 to 1878 between the government of Prussia, led by Otto von Bismarck, and the Roman Catholic Church, led by Pope Pius IX. The main issues were clerical control of education and ecclesiastical appointments. And it's something to do with the Poles. Okay. Oh, God, it says, I sent your channel to a rabbi called Yosef Mizrahi and asked him if you are correct in your thoughts. Haha, he said he is a true know-how and got some good ideas. My goodness, praise indeed. Well, I talk about him quite a lot. Are you Jewish? Got it. I can have a look at the gay science. I mean, obviously it's to do with, okay, let's have a look at what the gay science was supposed to say. Oh, I'm not going to talk about gayness, okay? So this is described as Nietzsche's middle period, during which his work extolled the merits of science, skepticism, and intellectual discipline as routes to mental freedom. The affirmation of the Provençal tradition invoked through the book's title is one of a joyful yay saying to life. In the gay science, Nietzsche experiments with the notion of power but does not advance any systematic theory. So it's referring to the dismal science, which is economics. And so the opposite of the dismal science is gay science, and nothing to do with homosexuality. It's about, life-affirming arts and, music and poetry and that kind of thing to make us happy, rather than the dismal science that is materialist economics. So I can read you a quote of about what he says. I can't be bothered. It's too kind of highfalutin, too vague, and too drowning in hyperbole. But we know that Nietzsche was concerned about the morals of Germans because he did later explore Islam. He said, well, he didn't like it, but at least he did read the Quran, right? He did. Oh, shit. Oh, so you're not Muslim? Oh, you're Gentile. I wasn't. And you communicate with Rabbi Miswaki. That's interesting. Yeah, the thing about Islam is that it's saying you don't have to kind of make too much of an effort to believe in it, because it all comes from natural law, and that here's the reasoning. We are here because there has been there was a creation, because we are part of creation. Because there was a creation, there must have been a creator, and that creator is the Abrahamic God who has communicated to humanity through the Torah and the Quran. It's very easy to understand and easy to remember. And this God would be the most powerful God conceivable, because he created the universe and he knows our hearts and minds, and is a living God that occasionally answers prayers and is in control of everything. So that is the narrative. And you don't need to go, but how is Jesus God? And obviously, even if you don't believe in God, he, atheists actually would share this conception of God with theists, in that, God is, okay, it's just an idea, it's just a lie, but, and that would be, still the best way to think of God, even if you disbelieve, because God is an idea, and even if he doesn't exist, this idea has a power to move mountains, to change the course of civilization, and etc., etc. So that would be the best way to think of the Abrahamic God as an idea. I mean, actually, you might have to think he's more than an idea. He actually exists, or at the very least, he is an idea that has a powerful hold on humanity, because so many people want to believe in him. And I would argue that Islam is natural law. You don't need, if you think about it, you think, yeah, it makes sense. I mean, if we have, if a loving God exists, a benign God exists, then obviously he'd try and communicate with us. He wouldn't just sort of, not bother. And well, he's done so twice, as far as we know, according to history. You're very kind. You're very kind. Oh, I have a few fans. That's always nice to know. Well, got it. Joe has been said to be really deep down in love with me. I mean, Thomas Barton Rees said that, because he can't stop talking about me, even on other people's channels. He asks people what they think of me, and goes on and on and on, and this, as if he were obsessed with a burning passion for me, and he has to overcompensate, because his white male pride can't take it that I am what I am, and there's no one of my stature and my intellect around to help white people, and it's me. It's just little old me, and he can't get over it, and that's why he has to hate on me. And I know deep down he's thrilled at the idea, but he probably thinks he can't cope with me. I know he can't, because he's only, well, no, not very masculine. He's like a hysterical woman, and he can't help himself, and he doesn't want to marry, and he's probably too afraid to have children, afraid of having his feelings hurt by a woman. So he has to say terrible things about me in the chat and the comments, and I let them stand, because I want to show that I can take it. I can take it, Joe. I'm not afraid of you. Oh, so you're from Montenegro. Yes, I know. It's something to do with Serbia and the First World War. That's what I remember. There was a film called Montenegro I remember watching. A degenerate film. Yeah. I think it's terrible. I mean, I know that sometimes I do eat on a stream, and it's like, it's not nice listening to people talk with their mouth full. I think what would be nice is to have another woman on a stream. And I know people have been talking about Alison, and she's kind of not happy with me, really, because I've been saying, look, just come on my show and you can talk about your issues with Jews. It would just be great. Everybody would be agog to hear. And it's like, okay, you can come on my show and then just not talk about Jews. You can talk about anything, and everybody's going to try and make you talk about Jews, and you have to not talk about Jews. And that would be the, comedic element of it. What do you think, people? Do you think that'd be fun? Do you think that'd be fun if I could get Alison on the show and I can suggest that she answer questions in the chat, and then you'll have to somehow with your questions and comments make a talk about Jews. I think it'd be hilarious. I mean, I've been saying, come on, just do it. Come on my show and do it. And everybody would watch, including the Jews. And it would be, seen as therapy for anti-Semites. Well, I wanted to, I thought she'd be a good sport about it, but she's just getting annoyed at me, so. I know something about Nietzsche. I know he died of syphilis. No. I mean, he did have syphilis, and then he got upset at somebody flogging a horse, and he stopped it, and then he had a heart attack, or something of that nature. Anyway, he died. Rather tragically. And he never resolved his issues, did he? Let's see how he died. Relationships and sexuality, insanity and death. Suffered a mental breakdown in 1889. Two policemen approached him after he caused a public disturbance in the streets of Turin. What happened remains unknown, but an often repeated tale from shortly after his death states that Nietzsche witnessed a flogging of a horse at the other end of the Piazza. Carlo Alberto ran to the horse, threw his arms round his neck to protect it, then collapsed to the ground. In the following few days, Nietzsche sent short writings known as Van Zettel, literally delusion notes, to a number of friends, including Cosima Wagner and Jacob Burckhardt. Most of them were signed Dionysus, though some were also signed Der Gekreuzigt, meaning the crucified one. To his former colleague Burckhardt, Nietzsche wrote, I have had Caiaphas put in fetters. Also last year I was crucified by the German doctors in a very drawn-out manner. Wilhelm Bismarck and all anti-Semites Semites abolished. Yeah, well, he was obviously obsessed with religion, and Christianity didn't help him. All because Christianity is pretty messed up. Anyway, here, tertiary syphilis. I'm going to word search Islam. So there's an article on Nietzsche and Islam. No, it's a book, it's a book. So somebody wrote a book about Nietzsche and Islam. So I guess I should consider that as a mistake. Now, a few entries have popped up on my search. Nietzsche and Islam. When the celebrated German philosopher Friedrich Nietzsche was 21, he wrote a letter to his sister Elizabeth from Bonn, where he was studying theology. Oh, I think that studying theology drove him mad. In the letter, Nietzsche wanted to justify why he was abandoning his studies. He criticized what he saw as a provinciality of Christianity and suggested that had he and his sister, both of them were Lutherans, been followers of Muhammad rather than Christians, their lives would not have been all that different. Nietzsche was very critical of Judeo-Christian Europe and saw Islam and Islamic culture as a handy store of alternative customs and values to undermine the universalist claims of both European Christianity and modernity. In his comparisons between Islam and Christianity, Nietzsche clearly felt there to be something essentially life-affirming about Islam. Ooh. Perhaps the most significant references by Nietzsche to Islam can be found in The Antichrist, which he wrote towards the end of his life. The relevant sections below. I'll give you the link before I forget. He writes, one needs but read any of the Christian agitators, for example, St. Augustine, in order to smell what filthy fellows came to the top. It would be an error, however, to assume that there was any lack of understanding in the leaders of the Christian movement. But they were clever to the point of holiness, these fathers of the church. What they lacked was something quite different. Nature neglected, perhaps forgot to give them even the most modest endowments of respectable, of upright, of cleanly instincts. Between ourselves, they are not even men. If Islam despises Christianity, it has 1,000-fold right to do so. Islam at least assumes that it is dealing with men. He continues, Christianity destroyed for us the whole harvest of ancient civilization, and later it also destroyed for us the whole harvest of Mohammedan civilization. The wonderful culture of the Moors in Spain, which was fundamentally nearer to us and appealed more to our senses and tastes than that of Rome and Greece, was trampled down. I do not say by what feet. Why? Because it had to thank noble and manly instincts for its origin, because it said yes to life, and even to the rare and refined luxuriousness of Moorish life. The Crusaders later made war on something before which it would have been more fitting for them to have grovelled in the dust, a civilization beside which that of our 19th century seems very poor and very senile. What they wanted, of course, was booty. The Orient was rich. Let us put aside our prejudices. The Crusades were a higher form of piracy, nothing more. The German nobility, which is fundamentally a Viking nobility, was in its element. There, the church knew only too well how the German nobility was to be won. The German noble, always the Swiss guard of the church, always in the service of every bad instinct of the church, but well paid. Consider that. Consider the fact that it is precisely the aid of German swords and German blood and valour that has enabled the church to carry through its war to the death upon everything noble on earth. At this point, a host of painful questions suggest themselves. The German nobility stands outside the history of the highest civilization. The reason is obvious. Christianity, alcohol, the two great means of corruption. Instinctively, there should be no more choice between Islam and Christianity than there is between an Arab and a Jew. The decision already reached. Nobody remains at liberty to choose here. Either a man is a Chandala or he is not. War to the knife with Rome, peace and friendship with Islam. This was a feeling, this was the act of that great free spirit, that genius among German emperors, Frederick II. What? Must a German first be a genius, a free spirit, before he can feel decently? I can't make out how a German would ever feel Christian. Well, that's interesting, isn't it? I didn't know that. Obviously, as I have just read, Nietzsche was very concerned about the morals of Germans, particularly after he read theology and knew what a bunch of trash it is. Yes, Islam is a code of laws and behavior, and it has a book of rules called the Quran. Not really a religion, just a moral code and a way of life. Our politicians need this, don't they? If we don't want it for ourselves, we want it for our political classes, our ruling classes, don't we, Joe? God, it is so sweet. Yeah, it's saying, Muhammad was a cub, right? He was a cub and he had and Khadija was a cougar. I can pronounce Dionysus. I can pronounce Dionysian. Dionysus. Yeah, Dionysus. Yes, you should read that link I've just read from about what Nietzsche said about Islam, and I do mean you, Joe. There's no need to read Nietzsche. It's like, we know how he died. So basically all his writings was him wondering if this could be that and that could be this and what could it be, and obviously studying theology messed with his mind. And really, he hated Christianity, and so did Hitler. And really, Hitler missed his chance. Instead of going to war, he should have just converted the Germans to Islam when he was absolute dictator. He had the most talented propagandists in Germany. Joseph Goebbels. You could have just made him do it. I mean, Goebbels was actually he was a classicist, wasn't he? He studied the classics at university. So, imagine if it did the right thing and converted the Germans to Islam, and then it would have spread to the rest of Europe. And then, he wouldn't be so reviled, right? Goebbels looks a bit Jewish, What is philology? He attained a doctorate in... Okay, philology is a study of language in oral and written historical sources. It is the intersection of textual criticism, literary criticism, history and linguistics. Philology is more commonly defined as the study of literary texts as well as the... Oh, it's like media studies. It's media studies, right. But okay, so Goebbels had the gift of the gab. Linguistics, really, it's linguistics. Classical philology studies classical languages. Classical philology principally originated from the Library of Pergamum and the Library of Alexandria. It's an old subject, around the 4th century BCE, continued by... Okay, so you basically... I don't know what I don't really know much about it. The meaning of words. But I think it sounds a bit like media studies. And it would explain Goebbels' facility at his propaganda. Propagandists in Berlin. So Goebbels practices public speaking skills in front of a mirror. Okay, I'm not going to do Goebbels. I'll just read your comments. Yes, the thing about Muhammad is that he had a lot of wives, more than the 4 that's allocated to ordinary Muslims, but that's because they were the widows of his companions, I think. Is that right? And to give them status, he said, well, you're my wife, instead of you're my servant, and I suffer you to live in my household because I'm charitable. And that was the reason, and he didn't really have sex with them. His favorite was Aisha, as we all know. Yeah, I have been in touch with Adam Green, and he's never even responded. I'm sure he knows who I am. I'm afraid these alt-right YouTubers, these men, these white Western men, somebody suggested that they might be a bit intimidated by my intellect. I have to accept that, this could be true. But obviously I'm not going to be nasty to them. That's the thing, I know I have been mean to people, but only if they're mean to me. I mean, obviously, I want people to think that I'm nice and that, that I do care about white people and somebody should be looking after them when their government clearly hates them. I'm like what's the name of that boy who put his finger in the dike to stop his town from flooding? He actually has a name, doesn't he? Little Dutch boy with his finger in the dike. He didn't mean it. He probably just went out for a walk. And then Hans Brinker. So what was the story exactly? Oh, you could think of me as a female Jonah. Oh, it was Harlem. The story about the little Dutch boy told how he saved Harlem from flooding by putting his finger in the dike. Another story about Hans Brinker was about a boy who wanted to win silver skates. And apparently the story was invented by an American woman. But anyway, the story is that maybe this isn't the right page. It's full of flooded Dutch homes. I wanted the actual story. The little Dutch boy who saved Holland. Once there was a little Dutch boy who discovered a leak in the dike. What should he do? From a single leak, a terrible breach might grow. The whole country could be flooded, and everyone everyone he knew would drown. So he did the only thing he could think of. He stuck his finger in the dike, and the leak stopped. Of course, now he was stuck. He couldn't move because as soon as he did, the leak would start again. So he stood there for quite some time. He was rather tired, and his finger felt a bit numb from the effort of holding back the North Sea, but he knew he was doing his duty. At last, the burgomaster happened to pass by. "Young man," he said with a certain amount of sternness, "why are you poking your finger in the dike?" "I'm stopping a leak," the boy explained. "I saw the dike leaking, so I stuck my finger in the hole." "Heroic boy," the burgomaster exclaimed. "You shall be rewarded. Meanwhile, keep your finger there while I call the burghers together." So the burgomaster called a meeting of the burghers, and they agreed that the boy had heroically saved Holland. And now, the burgomaster asked, "What shall we do about the leak?" "It seems to me," one of the burghers replied, "that private enterprise has already found an admirable solution to the problem. The boy has stuck his finger in the dike and the leak has stopped. You might describe it as voluntary self-regulation. There is no need for expensive government action." So the burghers voted to award the boy a certificate of good citizenship, which the burgomaster was delighted to be able to present to him the next day. "Thank you," the boy said politely, "but I still have my finger in the dike." "And we appreciate that," the burgomaster replied. "I may confidently speak for the whole council of burghers in saying that your heroic action is universally admired." So the boy stood there with his finger in the dike for a few more days. It was not long, however, before another leak sprang in the dike a little bit further down the way. "What shall we do?" the burgomaster asked the burghers. "There is another leak." "As private enterprise has so admirably solved the previous problem," one of the burghers responded, "the solution to this new leak is obvious. We need only persuade another heroic boy to stick his finger in it." So they went into the local school and found another boy who, after much persuasion, was willing to stick his finger in the dike. It was, however, only a few days later that 2 more leaks appeared. This time it was much harder to persuade boys to stick their fingers in the holes, and when a week later 6 more leaks appeared, no volunteers were to be found. What shall we do? The burgomaster asked the council. Private enterprise seems no longer to be adequate. We may have to repair the dike itself this time. Nonsense, says one of the burghers. The solution that worked before will work again. We simply force private enterprise into action. So the council visited the school and dragged a number of young boys by the ears to the dike, where they were forced to plug their leaks with their fingers. But the dike, which was old and poorly maintained, continued to spring new leaks here and there, so that it was all the burghers could do to find more boys to plug up the leaks with their fingers. At last, the burghers compelled every little boy in the Low Countries to stick his finger in a hole. All economic activity came to a halt, as it is well known that young boys are the leading consumers of skates and cheese, on which the economy of Holland depended at the time. What shall we do? The burgomaster asked the council. We have run out of heroic little boys. At this rate, we may have to plug the leaks with our own fingers. That would be moderately inconvenient, one of the burghers remarked. So the council voted to remove the North Sea by digging a new seabed somewhere in Germany, and they voted themselves a number of solid gold spades befitting their dignity for the purpose. And if you go to suburban Wilhelmshaven right now and look into the field to your right as you drive westward on the Friedenstrasse, you'll see a number of Dutch burghers very busy with their spades trying to dig a new bed for the North Sea. It is lucky for them that the people of Wilhelmshaven have mistaken the burghers for a party of archaeologists looking for ancient Saxon remains, which has allowed them to continue the work uninterrupted. Right. I think I've spoken for long enough. I hope you enjoyed that story. I guess I'll be speaking to you again before too long.